Hey, everybody. So, it's been a while since the last Coffee and Semmler. And, been on the road quite a bit, been doing events, all that jazz. So, it's only now that I'm basically getting around to actually doing something. And so, yesterday I had a stream. Today I thought that I would touch on a topic that seems to be a bit complicated, to be frank, because it's something that we've had that's been recurring for quite some time in the esports scene, not even CS as a whole, but esports as a whole, which is that question of oversaturation. And the general idea seems to be, or the solution rather, for oversaturation seems to be there are too many tournaments. And so we need to cut back on the tournaments. We need to kill certain tournaments. And so I was of that general lean for quite some time, where I thought that, well, with too many tournaments, the players are not going to say no to money, and so they're just going to keep competing in these tournaments. And they will just keep going. That promotes the tournaments, or that incentivizes the tournaments to keep creating tournaments, and so there keeps getting money, and there's a constant growth in the scene. There's a lot of money coming into the scene, and whether this is a good or bad thing, right, is up for discussion. But it seems to me like the main point is always kill the tournaments because of oversaturation. Now, since a year and a half now, I've been talking to the teams, trying to see if it would be possible at all for there to be some kind of pullback on the team's point of view towards a focus on a specific tournament. So say you're a team, right? And there are 3 leagues. Instead of participating in all 3 leagues and making life very difficult for yourself, why not pull back and say we will only participate in 1 or 2 out of 3 of these leagues? Now, that was my approach at the beginning of this year. I had that very conversation with Device from Astralis at the beginning of this year, with Taco from SK. That was my idea at the time. Say, why don't you actually pull back and not participate in so many online matches, and instead focus on having some online matches, but also some time to sit and prac and actually put some work into it and actually come up with new strategies, etc. Because I assume that's the idea, right? The thing is, in an ideal world, and the thing is that I also come back to it, I think that this would be in an ideal world sort of scenario where you would have teams and tournaments. And the tournaments, if there are more tournaments, the team starts saying no to tournaments. That allows for tournaments to that allows for teams rather to actually practice and have some time off and have some time to basically take a step back from the game and come up with new things for the game and new strategies, etc., that might catch their opponents off guard. That was my state of mind at the beginning of the year. Now, and this isn't so much a coffee and Semmler as a beer and Semmler, so cheers. It's late in the evening, but I felt like coming back to the office to actually have a little bit of a sit down with you all. So what I'm curious about is whether or not, so this question of, and oversaturation only ever comes from declining numbers in viewership. That's always going to be the question, right? So long as viewership is growing steadily, then everybody's super hunky-dory, right? Everybody's happy about it, and it feels really good. As soon as things start to plateau or even decline, then you start to have these questions of oversaturation. People start to bring it up, and it starts to become a question. It starts to become an argument. It starts to get into people's heads of, oh, well, there's oversaturation, and this isn't a good thing. What I wanted to try and explore tonight, rather, would be from a different perspective. So there are going to be leagues, right? These tournament organizers, I've talked about this in past videos, right? There are tournament organizers. They are companies. Companies need to make revenue. And the model that esports has gone on recently has been, for the past couple of years, right, has been online leagues. Because you can produce X million number of hours consumed for a league that spans several months leading into a big LAN final. And when you take that to a sponsor and you say, we're going to give you X number of hours consumed for this tournament, it's a big number because there's a lot of online hours consumed as well, and your brand is getting X exposure. And right, that to me seems like the model that tournament organizers have locked themselves into, unfortunately. And that is the model that seems to be the predominant one right now in the scene. We are going to give you a large X number of hours consumed versus the smaller X of a LAN tournament, right? So a 3 to 5 day event that happens over the span of a week and versus the span of 3 months. So unfortunately, it seems to me like the leagues have kind of blocked themselves into this. Now, this is from an outside perspective. Can't say that I've had that many conversations with tournament organizers regarding this sort of thing, their sales strategy and how they actually approach selling sponsorships for their leagues. But from an outside perspective, it seems to me that this is the approach that they have taken. We will give you a maximum number of hours watched for the content, and you will pay X for that. But it sounds to me like that, or at least looking in from the outside, that seems like a very difficult sort of scenario or position to come back from. Because once you have managed to sell that sponsorship to a sponsor, and you are selling X number of hours, it's very hard to come back to that sponsor and say, hi, well, we want to sell you a 5-day tournament for the same amount of money. That will be far fewer viewers, right? So we're in this sort of scenario right now where, unfortunately, it seems to me the leagues are here to stay. And that, to me, is definitely not ideal. Just because when I've had this discussion multiple times now over the past couple of months, and with different people, commentators, analysts, players, etc., right? Nobody's a fan of the leagues, unfortunately. Nobody's a fan of the leagues. Nobody really likes the leagues. From the commentator perspective, the leagues are good because you get paid a day rate for those leagues. So you're going to those leagues and you're working in a studio and you're getting paid a day rate to do those leagues. So there's that. I mean, it's money in your pocket. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing regarding the bigger picture for the scene itself, that's a different argument, right? But directly, right, it's money in your pocket if you are working that studio day, because that studio day equals money in your pocket, right? So from the commentator perspective, that's what you're looking at. The more leagues, the more days on camera, the more money in your pocket. And for the players, in general, these online leagues lead into the biggest payoff as far as prize pool is concerned. So you have ESL and you have ECS and you have E-League. And I think that E-League are by and far the best one out of the bunch. But for ECS and Pro League, you have a fuckload of days that are going into this league that then go into the LAN. And if you qualify through the league into the LAN, you get a big payoff, right? There's a lot of money on the line, and you're able to, and that's the incentive for participating in the league. But I still feel like when it comes to the community gets riled up about this because it comes down to viewership, and it feels like viewership has plateaued or declined, and there's obviously cause for concern with this. We saw this in Dota 2, we saw this in StarCraft 2, we've seen this in multiple games, so we're not the first to have this discussion. But what I wonder is, what I'm interested in is rather a different take. Not that there are so many leagues and so many games that are worthless, because teams don't care whether when they're past actually qualifying for the LAN, the teams stop caring. They're only playing the games because they have to. They're like that football player who showed up for an interview and literally said, bald-faced, I'm only here because otherwise they'll find me, right? It's the same thing for the teams at that point. They don't give a fuck about the league. They're only playing the games because they have to. Because otherwise they might not be able to play next season when they've maybe changed their roster and feel like they're going to be a better team. Throughout the rest of it, they're only there because they're getting not even paid to be there, but because otherwise they might not get a chance to get paid in the future. So the league there is a faulty system, right? It's falling, or I feel like it's not as efficient as it could be. But this isn't the angle that I want to take, right? Whether, teams, etc., are participating. What I'm more interested in is the side of the show. Because to me, that's where I wonder, right? We're seeing perhaps a plateau, perhaps a decline. I mean, I feel like over the next couple of weeks, at least over the next few days while I'm home, this is something that I'm going to be looking into is what has the viewership looked like, right, for these different lands, for these online leagues? What is the viewership actually looking like for Counter-Strike? And I want to compare it to numbers from Dota 2. But for this particular point, what I'm interested in rather is the quality of the streams and the quality of the events. Because right now, what I feel like is that tournament organizers are looking to put out a minimum. And this is where I could see perhaps that the fan, the community member gets frustrated or perhaps loses interest, is because I feel like streams for the longest time have been just the same, that we haven't raised the level. Esports, when I watch an esports stream, I feel like I'm watching something that's cutting edge in general. When I watch a top-notch esports stream, because we don't see this level on TV. I go and watch TV, and I feel like I'm watching I feel like I'm watching a tier 2 esports event most of the time. Apart from like really flashy studios or other things, right? Like I watch Swedish Net SVT, etc., right? And I feel like I'm just watching like a tier 2 esports stream. I feel like it's nothing that stands out. So I think that we've already in esports hit that level. And I feel like esports could be the cutting edge of production, period. Whether it be online or TV, linear, etc., right? I feel like esports could be the cutting edge, what everybody looks to for a show in the future. That's where I'm at right now in my head, right? Where I'm thinking every time we do a show, I feel disappointed if we haven't pushed a boundary, if we haven't pushed something forward that is cutting edge, or at least that is trying to explore something that we haven't quite in the future, right? And so when it comes to oversaturation, right, and people losing interest, what I wonder is maybe it isn't the number of games or the fact that we see all these tier 1 teams competing day in, day out, right? Maybe it's because we're not getting enough out of the stream. Now, this has come back to me after reading a couple of books. I did an interview recently where I was reminded that I have read a couple of books now on sports commentary, right? And sports commentary, how sports commentators, the best in the sports commentator industry, right? How they approach their craft, how they approach their job, which is to commentate, whether it's providing the score, providing stats, providing strategy, etc. Listening to those broadcasts, when I was in a cab from the Atlanta Midtown right to the airport, the cab driver had the football match on. And it was fun to listen to a radio broadcast, right, of a different sport, just to listen for tips and tricks for myself, right? I'm just listening to what this commentator is doing, and I'm thinking, oh, could I incorporate this into my commentary? Could I incorporate this into my style, etc., right? And I'm just listening to them, and they have all sorts of stats. They have all sorts of interesting little tidbits that make it so that when I'm listening, I'm like, ooh, shit, that guy just got like, when I was in that cab, some guy managed to break his all-time record of a field goal kick. It was like 59 yards or something, but that was like the new record, right? And I was like, oh shit, because leading into it, the guy was just like, oh yes, 2 years ago it was 60 yards or whatever, blah blah blah. And I was just like, oh my god, I'm like feeling like a little bit more interested now because maybe he'll do it, and then he did it. Super interesting in a way, but like what I was interested in was more like, okay, what could we do to actually make the streams more interesting, right? Could we actually come up with something that that actually makes each show unique, rather than counting on the teams, because it's always going to be the same teams. And right now I feel like it's the flattest it's ever been. It's the flattest it's ever been as far as competition is concerned between the teams, because you don't have one team that's dominating over another. You don't have this insane rivalry, the way, like 2014 between Fnatic and LDLC. That's the big one that I can think of that I really find interesting. That was when I was so fucking fascinated with the entire thing, because LDLC, I was very interested to see how LDLC performed due to the fact that was after the big break of Titan, the shattering, the reshuffling of the French scene, and you had Titan on one side and LDLC on the other. It was fascinating to see how that team would perform. And then you had Fnatic, who were just these monsters who were just owning everybody, right? And so that was a very interesting time as far as I'm concerned, because you had this true rivalry between the two teams. Or 2015, you had the dominance of SK, winning 2 majors in a year that only had 2 majors. So they won 2 majors, and they were outright the most dominant team during that period of time. So you had that. Now, right now, in 2016, it feels very... Well, I mean, 2016. Why am I saying 2015 when it comes to SK? It was 2016. Silly of me. But still, point remains. We've only had 2 majors this year, and SK dominated both of them. And end of 2015, going into 2016, was their time, right? So this is the most even it's been across the board as far as teams are concerned right now. What I wonder right now is whether or not we can push it on the production level. Because the main thing that tournament organizers are doing, and the main thing that their approach is, and pretty much always has been, well, if we provide this level and that flies by, then that's good enough and we don't need to do anything more. At least that's how it feels doing it, right? That's how it feels working in the crew, and that's led to a lot of frustration on my part when it comes to these shows, is that, you know, it feels like if we do this level, that's good enough, and that's all we need to do to actually do the show, and that's a successful show. And it doesn't feel like really anybody has really pushed that. And whether that's due to time constraints regarding the broadcast, whether that's due to the structure of the tournament, whether there's not enough time in the broadcast to actually do anything that pushes the boundaries. That's kind of where I feel like, I wonder if that is why perhaps people, you know, are not as interested in CS as they were in the past, because it used to be all about the game, right? But I wonder if there is something there where people want more from a stream and they aren't getting it. Right? If they want more stats, if they want more content, if they want more vis-a-vis to the players, right? If they want more things that will get them involved, invested in a stream and in a team and a player, whether that's stats that break down this season, if that's stats that break down this match, if that's live stats that come up where this like he hasn't had this headshot percentage for the past year and now he's hitting it in this key game. I don't know. That's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering right now. I mean, granted, like we've been on the road a lot, and I've been thinking about this a lot when it comes to like how can we increase the production value, right, of a tournament, right? Air quotes. But I feel like right now the distinct impression that I get is that tournament organizers right now, yes, they're getting these big ass venues and it's sick, but when it comes to the stream, it doesn't feel like anything has changed in the stream. And to me, that's exceedingly frustrating, because I feel like that should be the priority, that should be the focus. It's not necessarily the venue where it's at. It's like, what kind of show can you put on, and will that keep people interested? Will that get people excited? And so I wonder if that's actually got something to do with, coming full circle, right? If that's got something to do with the oversaturation, and if that has something to do with where we are right now, where it does seem like we aren't quite getting people as excited as we were in the past. And this is a very complex issue, as I'm sure you guys can tell, whether it's going to be interest in teams, interest in games, interested in production, interested in commentators, analysts, etc. There's a bunch of different factors that go into it, but I do feel like there are more ways to there's more to be done on the content, stats, analyst, show side of things than tournament organizers are actually doing. Whether that's big flashy WWE entries into the stage with you know, scripted text that's being read out by the hype voice with this team's theme song and all sorts of shit like that, or if it's stats and actually interesting stats that are relevant, that are brought up during an analyst section or during a game, or if it's, again, like the Valve stories about the players, right, where they send a camera crew over to these players' homes, to these players' families, and start talking to them. But this is an interesting thing as far as building a show, where we're at and how do we push it further so that it's more fun for everybody who's tuning in to watch, and it's more fun for us, it's more fun for everybody involved, right? But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of floating around right now where I'm not really sure what the next direction is, because it feels to me like the tournament organizers are content to do the same stuff that they've been doing since 2011, and I'm wondering, when do we take the next step, right? When do we actually take the next step and we spend the money to actually have a full stats team, a full content team, these sorts of things? I mean, I understand there's always different points of view, right? There's always different pictures when it comes from this sort of scenario, right? Where from a tournament organizer point of view, that's a cost, and it's just a cost, right? It's very difficult to make your money back on that sort of investment. You're sending a camera crew to X place, and that costs X dollars, and then you have to have a production crew who cut up that footage and make that footage and turn it into something that's actually watchable. Again, cost, and then you're going to put that on, but you don't have it sponsored, perhaps, or you don't, it's just cost. And, well, tournament organizers in esports right now, people seem to think that, there's boatloads of cash rolling in, but at least the endemic tournament organizers are looking to try and make it profitable, trying to find a way to make it profitable. And that extra content definitely takes a hit on that profitability, right? Hell, there's a tournament that just went way overboard and did everything they could, at least, in their sense, right, to make a big show. And they just got hammered because it was way overboard. There was so much money. So, I mean, so much money spent and not enough money coming in. So, I don't know. This is just me kind of exploring different options. But I wonder if the quality of the show, rather, right, actually building a show and the quality of the show, and not just saying that it's the gameplay and trying to do things around the gameplay to try and make it a bigger show, rather than just taking the easy way out, which is just to say, well, people only are interested in watching the game and that's it, right? They're only interested in watching the game, I mean, I wonder if that isn't lazy, if that isn't something that's just an easy cop-out excuse, and if there isn't a way to actually push forward and say, okay, yes, it is the game. Obviously, we're all interested in watching Counter-Strike. It is the game, but isn't there something more that we can be done and that we can do to improve the show? And I wonder if TO shouldn't start thinking about that a little bit, if that isn't the future, if that isn't something that we need to actually start doing to begin with. Or not to begin with, but in the future. All right. Well, it's been a long time since I've had a coffee and Semmler, so, well, I'll see if I do one tomorrow. But have a good night, everybody. Take care.